For 10 years, Nathan Carter fixed what Victoria Hayes broke. Every defective engine her company quietly buried, the ones that failed emissions tests, the ones that cracked under pressure, the ones that would have ended careers if they had ever surfaced, ended up in crates behind his garage. No press, no paper trail.
Favorite little mechanic.
Just Nathan, his tools, and a daughter who fell asleep to the sound of wrenches. He never complained. He kept every record. And when Victoria Hayes' empire finally collapsed under the weight of its own lies, she had nowhere left to go except his door. He had fixed everything she broke. Now she needed him to fix the one thing she could not, her truth. The town of Dunbar, Ohio, did not ask much of the people who lived there. It asked for work, patience, and the good sense to know when something was worth keeping. Carter Auto Repair sat at the corner of Maple and 9th Street, a one-story building with a green tin roof that rattled faintly in the wind and a hand-painted sign that had never been replaced since the day Nathan hung it. The paint had faded to a soft olive color, and the letters leaned slightly to the left, but Nathan had never bothered to fix it. There were more important things to repair. He was awake before 6 o'clock every morning. The alarm clock was unnecessary. His body had learned the hour the way a mechanic learns an engine from the inside out, by feel. He made coffee in the same chipped mug he had used for 9 years, dressed in the dark, and then walked down the hall to his daughter's room. Chloe was 6 years old, with a tangle of dark curls that fought the hairbrush every morning and a stuffed bear named Bolt that went everywhere she did. Nathan sat on the edge of her bed, gently working the brush through her hair while she slowly woke up, her eyes still half closed, one hand already reaching for Bolt. "Horn trucks today?" she asked one morning without looking up, the way children ask questions they already know the answer to. Nathan tied the last strand of her hair. "Probably." He dropped her off at Margaret Reed's house at 6:30. Margaret was 53, lived 2 blocks away, and had worked as his bookkeeper since the second year he opened the garage. She had never had children of her own and had quietly filled a space in Chloe's life that neither of them had ever named aloud. Then Nathan walked back to the shop, unlocked the rolling gate, and started his day. Hayes Automotive Group occupied a 40-story glass tower in downtown Columbus, 40 miles east of Dunbar. Victoria Hayes had taken over the company from her father at 31 and spent the 5 years since transforming it into something he would barely recognize. She was at her desk by 7:30 every morning in a black blazer, with quarterly projections already displayed on the screen behind her. Meetings never started late. Decisions never lingered. Around the company, people said Victoria Hayes had only 2 speeds, forward and faster. But every Thursday, a gray cargo van with Hayes Parts Division stenciled on its side drove 40 miles to Dunbar and stopped at Carter Auto Repair. The driver, always a different one, always quiet, would unload between 3 and 7 engine units, leave a small sealed envelope on top of the stack, and drive away. The envelope contained cash and a single sheet with a parts return reference number. No signature except a rubber stamp, no official invoice, just the engines, the envelope, and the understanding that Nathan Carter would not ask questions. He had learned not to ask questions. That lesson had been expensive. Margaret Reed watched him receive the delivery that Thursday morning from the shop doorway, her reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead. She was holding a manila folder. "That batch they sent last week," she said after the van had disappeared. "I pulled the manufacturing code. It's the 3rd unit from the same production batch in 5 months." Nathan crouched beside the nearest engine and pressed 2 fingers against the cylinder wall. He did not answer immediately. "I know," he said at last. "I labeled the other 2 the same way." Margaret opened the folder and held it out. Inside were photographs, handwritten analysis notes, and a printed sheet with production codes highlighted in yellow marker. She had been doing this quietly on her own time because she was the kind of person who believed things should be documented, even when the documentation served no immediate purpose. Nathan took the folder and studied it for a moment. "Put it with the others," he said. He had spoken those same words hundreds of times over 10 years. Margaret had always complied, and neither of them had ever discussed what the others were for, but they both knew. The back storage room of Carter Auto Repair contained 5 large filing cabinets, each painted a pale shade of blue that Nathan had chosen without really knowing why. The color was almost identical to the walls of the break room at the Hayes Automotive Engineering Facility, where he had worked for 12 years, the room where he had eaten lunch, written reports, and once, on a Tuesday in March 11 years earlier, argued with a man named Richard Bennett about a structural flaw in the HX4 engine series. Nathan Carter had been a senior engine design engineer at Hayes Automotive long before he became a garage owner. He had been good at the work, not the kind of good that earns compliments in hallways, but the quiet, precise kind that keeps machines from failing. The HX4 had largely been his creation: the combustion chamber geometry, the valve timing sequence, the specific alloy composition used in the cylinder walls. He had spent 2 years solving those problems, and when the engine entered production, his name had been listed on the internal design documents. Then his wife, Emily, was killed in a car accident on a Tuesday evening in November. Chloe was only 8 months old. Nathan took emergency leave, then extended leave, and when he finally emerged from the fog of grief, the company had restructured. Richard Bennett, who had been deputy director of the product division, quietly removed Nathan's name from the patent filings and reassigned design credit to a team Nathan had never led. By the time Nathan realized what had happened, he had neither the money for lawyers nor the strength to fight. Instead, he opened the garage. The first Hayes delivery arrived 14 months later. Nathan understood immediately what it meant. The engines being quietly outsourced to a small-town repair shop were not ordinary warranty returns. They were units suffering from the exact systematic flaw he had identified in a technical report the spring before his leave, a report Richard Bennett had signed and then buried. Someone inside Hayes Automotive was using Nathan's garage as a disposal route, removing defective engines from internal inventory before regulatory audits could detect them and scattering them through third-party repair shops where they could be quietly fixed or scrapped with no trail leading back to the company. Nathan was that third-party shop. He had the technical expertise to handle the engines without asking dangerous questions, and he needed the money. Richard Bennett knew both facts very well, so Nathan accepted the envelopes. He performed the repairs, and every single time, he documented everything: the unit code, the batch number, the fault pattern, the delivery date, the repair costs, and his analysis of the root cause. Then he filed it away in the blue cabinets, one folder per delivery, organized by year. He did it because he was the sort of person who never threw away data, and because somewhere, beneath the exhaustion of raising a child alone and running a business alone, he had always believed, without ever saying it aloud, that the data would matter someday. He sat at his workbench late that night after Margaret brought him the new folder, with Chloe asleep down the hall and a single lamp glowing above the row of cabinets. The stools in the shop were old, the floor was cold, and the overhead fluorescent light had been flickering for 3 weeks because he kept forgetting to replace it. He ran his thumb across the tabs of the current year's folders. 6 years of batch numbers matching the fault series he had documented in the report Richard Bennett buried. 10 years of evidence proving the problem had never been fixed, only hidden. He did not feel righteous about it. He felt tired, in the particular way a man feels when he has spent years carrying a weight that was never his to carry and has never once set it down because setting it down would mean abandoning the only honest thing he had left. He closed the cabinet and went to check on Chloe. The news broke on a Wednesday morning in October. Nathan was replacing a brake caliper on a customer's truck when Margaret stepped out of the office holding her phone at arm's length, as though the screen contained something that required distance. 340,000 vehicles, she said. 7 accidents. 2 of them serious. Nathan set down the caliper. He already knew which vehicles. He already knew which engine series. He already knew because he had been writing it down for 10 years. He looked toward the row of blue filing cabinets visible through the open storage room door, and for the first time in a very long while, he allowed himself to feel the weight of what he had been carrying. Inside the glass tower in Columbus, the collapse was not gradual. It happened the way structural failures happen, remaining invisible for a long time, and then arriving all at once. The recall announcement triggered an investigation. The investigation uncovered internal communications, and within 72 hours the company's stock had fallen 60%. The phone stopped ringing in the ordinary way and began ringing in the other way, the way that meant lawyers. Victoria Hayes sat in her office at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night, with the lights off and the city below continuing its business as though nothing extraordinary had happened. She had read every document her legal team had sent over the previous 3 days. She had read the recall filings, the accident reports, the preliminary investigation summary, and the document that kept returning to her thoughts, a memo from 2012 written by a senior engineer named Nathan Carter, warning the product division about a fault in the HX4 combustion chamber wall that could cause progressive cracking under sustained load conditions. The memo had been received and signed by Richard Bennett. It had never reached her desk. Her attorney, a compact and precise woman named Laura Mitchell, had called that afternoon with a simple assessment. To survive what was coming, Victoria needed an independent technical witness, someone who could demonstrate, from outside the company's own records, that the flaw was structural and long-standing, and that the decision to conceal it had been made below the executive level. The only person outside Hayes Automotive who had handled the engines in question and possessed the technical background to explain the fault patterns was Nathan Carter. Laura had found his name in an old parts return file one of the associates uncovered during document review. The reference was years old and led nowhere except a repair shop in a small town 40 miles west. The next morning, Victoria Hayes drove herself to Dunbar. She had not driven herself anywhere in 4 years. Nathan was lying beneath a pickup truck when the black sedan rolled into the lot. He heard the car door open and close, and the distinctive sound of heels on concrete, not the hesitant tapping of someone unfamiliar with garages, but a deliberate, measured stride. He slid out from under the truck and stood. She looked different from the photographs that appeared in the business section. The blazer was the same quality, but the posture was not. Her hair was styled, though not recently. Shadows beneath her eyes suggested a kind of exhaustion sleep could not repair. "Nathan Carter," she said. It was not a question. "I know who you are," he replied. He picked up a rag from the workbench and wiped his hands. He did not offer a handshake. 10 years I've been receiving your company's broken engines, just never had anyone call them that out loud." The statement landed exactly as he intended, not as an attack, but as a fact. Victoria Hayes had prepared herself for many possibilities. She had not prepared herself for a man who had no need to be impressed by her. She explained what she needed: a technical witness, an independent voice, documentation proving the fault had been designed into the engine rather than introduced later, proof that it predated her leadership and that someone had knowingly concealed it. Nathan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked, "What are you offering?" She named a figure. Nathan looked out the open garage door toward Margaret Reed, who was walking Chloe slowly around the lot, the little girl's hand in hers, bolt tucked beneath her arm. "That's not what I need," he said. "Then what?" Victoria asked. Nathan turned back toward her and met her eyes. There was no hostility in his expression, only the directness of a man who had spent a decade living beside the truth and could no longer pretend otherwise. "I need you to sit down and go through 10 years of records with me," he said. "And when you're finished, I need you to tell me whether you actually knew." She did not answer immediately. The moment lingered. Then Chloe pushed open the side door from the lot and looked between them with the cheerful curiosity only a 6-year-old could possess. "Daddy," she asked, "is she here to get a car fixed, or did she break one?" Nathan's mouth twitched in something that was almost a smile. "Go back with Margaret, sweetheart." Chloe studied Victoria for another moment with enormous dark eyes, then retreated. The door swung shut behind her. The blue filing cabinets filled the entire back wall of the storage room and stretched along part of the side wall. Victoria stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside. Nathan opened the first cabinet, the one labeled with the year the first delivery had arrived. He removed a folder and placed it on the work table. Photographs, handwritten notes, printed analysis forms, every document dated, every page signed. "This one arrived on a Tuesday in February," he said. "Batch code 7743 Echo, combustion chamber wall, hairline fracture consistent with the fault pattern I documented in the internal report I wrote the year before." He tapped a line in the notes. "I recognized it immediately. I designed that engine. I knew exactly which tolerance had been compromised." Victoria leaned closer. She could read the batch codes. She had spent 3 days reading batch codes. "This code," she said slowly, "it's on the recall list." "Most of them are," Nathan replied. He opened the next cabinet. "I have records going back 10 years. Every unit, every batch code, every fault analysis, all cross-referenced to the original HX4 design file, which I kept a personal copy of because it was my work." He said it without bitterness. It was simply the truth. Victoria sat on the old stool beside the table and picked up one of the folders from the middle years. Nathan did not rush her. He stood at the opposite end of the table with his arms crossed and let her move through the records at her own pace. It took nearly 2 hours. By the time she placed the last folder back on the table, something in her expression had changed. She looked like someone who had carried one version of a story for years and had just been handed another version that fit the facts far better. "Richard received your original report," she said quietly. "Before your leave?" "Yes. And then the engines started coming here 14 months later." "First delivery was 3 engines," Nathan said. "Same batch series, same fault. He was sending them to you because—" She stopped. "Because I had the skills to handle them without asking the right questions," Nathan finished. "Because he knew I needed the money. And because if any of this ever surfaced, a garage owner receiving off-the-books cash payments would make a much worse witness than a corporate executive." Victoria sat silently for a long time. Through the storage room wall, they could hear Chloe singing something completely tuneless out in the lot. "How old is she?" Victoria asked. 6. Another silence settled between them. "I'm sorry," Victoria said. Nathan looked at her. "Are you apologizing to Chloe or to me?" She did not answer right away, and Nathan thought that, at least, was an honest response. She stayed in Dunbar. There was nowhere else for her to go. The media had surrounded her headquarters, and Laura Mitchell advised her not to return until the preliminary filing was complete. She rented a room at the motel at the end of the main road and came to the garage every morning at 8 o'clock. They worked through the records together, Nathan, Victoria, and Margaret, building a timeline that stretched from Nathan's original report in 2012 to the most recent delivery from the previous month. Margaret cross-referenced batch codes against the published recall list with the careful concentration of someone who had always believed that numbers, properly maintained, would eventually tell the truth. On the second morning, Victoria picked up a socket wrench from the workbench and held it at the wrong angle. Nathan said nothing. He simply reached over and adjusted her grip, not demonstrating, just correcting, the way he would with anyone unfamiliar with the work. She registered the adjustment without comment. She was not accustomed to being corrected without explanation, but she was beginning to understand that some things inside this building were communicated differently. Chloe started calling her the lady with the good coat and dirty hands, which was accurate. On the 4th afternoon, Victoria quietly asked Nathan whether he had ever considered coming forward earlier. "When Chloe was 3, he said, "I had maybe $400 in savings and a box of records that would have required a law firm to present properly. Richard Bennett had an entire legal department. I did the math." He was not asking for sympathy. He was providing information. "That's the thing about systems like the one you ran," he continued. He was not looking at her. He was adjusting a calibration gauge on the engine in front of him. They don't have to threaten you directly. They just have to make the alternative impossible, and then they wait. She remained silent for a while. "I never knew about any of this," she said at last. "I want you to know that. I know it doesn't change anything." "I believe you," Nathan replied. He set the gauge down. "That might be the worst part. Not that you knew, that the system was designed specifically so you wouldn't have to." She sat with that thought for the rest of the afternoon. Richard Bennett called her that evening at 7:45. She was sitting in the motel parking lot with the phone on speaker, watching traffic move slowly along the road. "I know where you are," he said. "I know what you're doing." His voice carried the steady confidence of a man who had spent an entire career maintaining control and still believed control could be recovered. "Don't let that mechanic destroy what we built." "What you built," Victoria replied. "What we built together." A pause followed. "Think carefully." She ended the call. By the following morning, the story had shifted. A newswire published a short article sourced anonymously, describing Nathan Carter as a repair shop owner who had received unreported cash payments from a major automotive company. The article suggested that his anticipated testimony was financially compromised. It was brief, but it spread quickly. By 10 o'clock, 2 regular customers had called Margaret to cancel appointments. Nathan listened, nodded once, put the phone back into his pocket, and returned to work. Margaret found him an hour later. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "Keep working," he said. Victoria arrived at 9 and told him directly what Richard's team had done. They had found tax records from 2019 showing that Nathan had underreported income from some of the cash payments. Not fraud in any meaningful sense, just the reality of a man who could not afford a meticulous accountant during the hardest year of his business. But on paper, it could be presented as something worse. "You should know," she said. "If this gets worse, then it gets worse," Nathan replied. I didn't do anything wrong. I did something messy because my life was messy. There's a difference. He looked at her. If you need another witness, I understand. I'm not asking you to carry this for me. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, He's doing this because he's afraid of you. A man with 40 lawyers doesn't start digging through a garage owner's tax records because he feels confident. Nathan did not answer. That evening, Chloe asked him about the article. She had overheard Margaret talking on the phone. She was 6, and she understood far more than most adults expected. People said bad things about you, she said. She was not asking. She was reporting. Nathan sat down on the porch steps so they were eye level. Some people did, he said. But I didn't do a bad thing. I did a slow thing. Sometimes the right thing takes a long time. And while you're waiting, it can look wrong to people who aren't waiting with you. Chloe thought carefully about that. Is Victoria waiting with you? She asked. Nathan smiled faintly. I think she's starting to. It was Margaret who found it. She had been reviewing the 2016 folders, the middle years, the years Nathan had documented most thoroughly. At 11:47 that night, when Nathan had already gone home and she should have locked the garage an hour earlier, she found something. She called him from the shop phone. Come back, she said, right now. The folder she showed him was from the 3rd week of March, 2016. Inside was a standard delivery receipt for 6 engine units. Stapled to the back was a plain white envelope containing a handwritten note on Hayes Automotive stationery. Nathan recognized the handwriting instantly. He had seen it on enough internal memos over the years. It belonged to Richard Bennett. The note contained only 4 words: handle this, do not log it, rar, be. The batch code on the receipt matched a unit connected to a 2022 accident report. A man named Dennis Greer, 41 years old and the father of 2 children, had been driving a vehicle equipped with that engine when the fault caused the engine to seize at highway speed. He survived. He never walked again. Nathan read the note twice. Then he laid it flat on the workbench beneath the lamp. Victoria arrived within 15 minutes. She stood beside him, read the note, and said nothing for nearly a full minute. He used your garage as a vault, she said quietly, because he knew you would keep everything safe and never open it. Nathan looked down at the paper. He thought I didn't have the key. The call to Laura Mitchell went out at midnight. By morning, the legal team was assembling a submission package for the federal investigation. 10 years of batch-coded repair records, the original 2012 design report, the 2016 note, and Nathan's formal technical analysis linking every engine unit to the fault pattern he had identified a decade earlier. The truth had finally found its way out of the cabinets. Richard Bennett arrived at Carter Auto Repair the following Tuesday morning. He came alone. No assistant, no driver, no corporate car service. He drove himself in a silver sedan and parked in the lot with the careful precision of a man who still believed appearances mattered. He wore a suit that cost more than a month of Nathan's earnings, and his expression was the expression of someone preparing to negotiate. Nathan was standing at the workbench. He did not rise when Richard walked in. Richard made the offer without preamble. He was precise about it, as he was precise about everything. A specific amount of money, a specific request. The note from 2016 and Nathan's agreement to characterize the deliveries as routine contracted repair work rather than off-the-books disposal. In return, the tax issue would disappear and the news story would be retracted. Nathan listened to the entire proposal. Then he asked, "Do you know the name Dennis Greer?" Richard said nothing. 41 years old, Nathan continued. 2 kids. He was driving a vehicle with an engine from the batch your note came with. He didn't die. He just can't walk anymore. Nathan picked up the calibration gauge from the workbench and turned it slowly in his hands, not using it, simply holding it. "I read the local paper," he said. "Every week. I've done that for 10 years. I have a habit of paying attention to things people assume nobody's watching." Richard tried once more. "You cannot win against my legal team." Nathan's voice never changed. "Get out of my shop." Richard stared at him. "You're making a mistake." "I have a customer coming in at 10, Nathan said. "Get out of my shop." Richard Bennett stood in the center of Carter Auto Repair and looked around the room, the old tools hanging from pegboard hooks, the faded calendar on the wall, the framed photograph of Chloe, at age 3, taped beside the parts phone, the blue filing cabinets visible through the open storage room door. He looked at all of it and finally understood something that his title, His influence, and his decades of cultivated leverage, had never prepared him to face. A man with nothing left to protect is a man who cannot be threatened. Richard left without another word. Victoria had been standing outside beside the building. She had heard the entire conversation. When Nathan stepped outside, she was leaning against the wall with her arms folded, staring into the distance. "He'll try something else," she said. "Probably," Nathan replied. "It won't change what's in the cabinets." The federal hearing took place on a Thursday morning. Nathan arrived wearing khaki trousers and a white button-down shirt. Not a suit, just clean clothes pressed with care. He carried the submission package in an ordinary banker's box, the kind that cost a few dollars at an office supply store. He sat at the witness table and told the truth. He told it from the beginning, the original design work, the 2012 report, the restructuring, the first engine delivery, the 10 years of records, the note from 2016. He organized his testimony the same way he organized maintenance logs chronologically, clearly, and without embellishment. At one point, a committee member asked why he had maintained such extensive documentation for an entire decade. Nathan paused briefly before answering. "Because I was an engineer at that company," he said. "Engineers don't throw away data." It was a quiet sentence. It explained 10 years. Laura Mitchell presented the technical analysis later that afternoon. The batch code cross-references, the timeline from 2012 to the present, the original fault report, and the 2016 note carrying Richard Bennett's handwriting on Hayes Automotive stationery, instructing that a known defective batch remain off the official records. When Richard Bennett took the witness stand the following morning, he arrived with 4 attorneys and a prepared statement 47 pages long. By the second hour of questioning, his account of who knew what and when had begun to contradict itself in ways that became increasingly difficult to reconcile. The gaps in his documentation, compared to the completeness of Nathan's records, told a story 47 pages could not rewrite. The outcome arrived 3 weeks later. Richard Bennett was referred for criminal prosecution on charges related to evidence, concealment, and the deliberate cover-up of known safety violations. Victoria Hayes was formally removed from the list of primary subjects in the investigation. In the technical appendix of the final report, Nathan Carter was credited as the provider of critical independent documentation without which the full scope of the concealment could not have been established. He read the sentence once, folded the report, and placed it on the shelf above the workbench beside the framed photograph of Chloe. The following month passed the way most months passed at Carter Auto Repair. The work remained steady. A few new customers arrived after the media coverage, people who had read the story and assumed that a garage run by a man like Nathan was probably a garage that would not overcharge them. They were right. The old customers returned as well. The calendar filled with oil changes, wheel alignments, and a transmission rebuild Nathan was actually looking forward to. Margaret taped a sheet of paper to the front of the blue filing cabinets. It read, "Completed 2014 through 2024. She had found a blue marker almost identical to the cabinet paint, which pleased her enormously. Victoria came by on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks before she was scheduled to return to Columbus and finalize the restructuring of Hayes Automotive. She wore a coat Nathan had never seen before, softer than her usual clothes, something that looked as though it had been purchased in Dunbar rather than packed from a corporate closet. She carried a manila envelope. She handed it to him without a speech. Inside was a legal document, several pages long, formal in tone. Nathan's name appeared in the first paragraph. It was a rights restoration agreement executed by the newly restructured Hayes Automotive Board. The document restored authorship credit for the HX4 engine series to its original designer. His name would be returned to the patent records and the company engineering archives. Nathan read the first page, then the second. He stood silently at the workbench for a long moment with the papers in his hands. "I can't give back 10 years, Victoria said quietly. "But I can give back your name." Nathan folded the document carefully along its original crease and slipped it into the breast pocket of his work shirt. He did not answer immediately. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of something finally being set down after being carried for far too long. "Did you learn anything?" he asked. "From all of this?" Victoria thought about the question. She considered it seriously, the same way she had considered the folders in the blue cabinets. "I learned," she said at last, "that the people who say the least are usually the ones carrying the most." Nathan gave a single slow nod. The answer was enough. Chloe came running from the back lot, where she had been drawing with chalk on the old concrete pad. She collided with Nathan at waist height and wrapped her arms around him before looking up at Victoria with the direct honesty only a 6-year-old could manage. "You're leaving today?" she asked. "I am," Victoria replied. She crouched down to Chloe's level, something she would not have done naturally 3 weeks earlier. "But I'll remember this place." Chloe considered that carefully. "Remember it right," she said. "This is where my dad fixes cars. It's not where people drop off broken things and forget about them." Victoria looked at Chloe, then at Nathan, then back at the little girl. "I know," she said softly. "I know the difference now." Nathan walked her to her car. The afternoon sunlight stretched low and golden across the green tin roof. Victoria shook his hand, not as part of a deal, not as part of a negotiation, just one person acknowledging another. Nathan watched the black sedan pull out of the lot and head east toward Columbus, toward the glass tower and the difficult work of rebuilding things that had been broken for a very long time. Then he went back inside. For 10 years, Victoria Hayes had used the back lot of Carter Auto Repair as a place to leave the things she did not want to carry. What she never understood was that Nathan Carter had picked up every one of those things, not because he had to, not because it benefited him, not because he was waiting for an opportunity, but because he was the kind of man who never walked past something broken without paying attention to where the damage was, what it meant, and whether someday it might help reveal the truth. He had been right that it would matter. He simply never realized how patient someday would require him to be.